Hello, dear listener, and welcome once again to Boring Historians. If you've wandered here looking for rest, a soft place to land after a long day, or perhaps a little nighttime curiosity to lull your mind into gentle dreams, you've found just the right place. Tonight, we'll drift through candlelit corridors of palaces and courts and slip behind the velvet curtains of history to explore the secretive, gilded world of the royal mistress. But before we begin our long and dreamy wander, if you're enjoying these quiet voyages through the past, I warmly invite you to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new journey through time. And, if you feel comfortable doing so, I'd love it if you could leave a comment below, telling me where in the world you're listening from tonight. It's a quiet delight to see where our little community of sleepy historians has spread, across cities and forests, over mountains and oceans. So now, take a long, slow breath. Let your body rest, and allow your thoughts to float gently back to centuries past. Our journey tonight begins not with queens or kings, but with the women who walked beside them, not in marriage, not in power, but in something far more complex and often far more fragile. Let's begin. In the hushed alcoves of royal courts, beneath the surface of pageantry and protocol, lived a caste of women whose stories were both whispered and watched. They were not queens. They wore no official crowns, and yet they held the ear, the gaze, and often the heart of kings. To be a royal mistress was to walk a silken tightrope strung between power and peril, luxury and scandal, affection and ambition. In this long and wandering tale, we'll explore who these women were, how they came to such positions, and what their lives were really like behind the grand facades of palaces. We'll drift through the eras, gliding softly from the glittering courts of Louis XIV to the shadowed chambers of the Tudor dynasty and even beyond. So, gently now, allow your mind to float back to a time when lace rustled softly in the candlelight and perfume hung sweetly in the air of a moonlit boudoir. Let your breath slow and settle softly. Tonight, dear dreamer, we begin at the very edges of the official histories, in the silences between royal decrees, in the perfume-laced air of secret apartments and whispered conversations. To be a royal mistress was to be seen and yet hidden. She was neither wife, nor servant, nor stranger. She was something else entirely, something carefully, and often perilously, in between. The role of the royal mistress was never fixed, never written in stone like a queen's coronation or a king's title. It shifted, with time, with personality, with power. But across the centuries, from the medieval courts to the gilded salons of the Enlightenment, these women shared something very particular. They were confidants, companions, symbols of beauty and taste, and, in many ways, reflections of the kings themselves. Their stories are not just about romance or intrigue. They're stories of survival, of love sometimes, of loneliness often, of velvet gowns and quick-witted exchanges, of dangerous jealousies, hidden pregnancies, and dazzling jewels too heavy for one heart to bear. Let us drift now, deeper, into the flickering candlelight of this long-forgotten world. Let us meet the women who danced with kings and dared to live just outside the lines. We begin with François I, King of France, bold, cultured, and endlessly charmed by wit and beauty. It was the early 1500s, and the French court shimmered with gold brocade and towering feathered hats. Françoise de Foix, The Countess of Chateaubriand was one of the first to capture the king's roving heart. She was elegant, educated, graceful. She was not born into obscurity. The de Foix family held noble roots, and Françoise, even from her youth, was known for her elegance and uncommon intellect. She had married a Breton nobleman, Jean de Laval, Count of Chateaubriand, a respectable match, perhaps even a happy one. But when Françoise was presented at court, her beauty caused a stir. Descriptions of her mention golden hair, luminous skin, and eyes that could shift from ice to warmth with a single glance. But it was her composure, her refinement, that truly captured King François. She did not chase attention. In a court full of performance and flirtation, Françoise was restrained, even modest. The king's pursuit was gentle at first, lavish compliments, whispered invitations, small gifts with hidden meanings. In time, the affection blossomed into an open liaison. Her husband, perhaps wisely, retreated to his estates, leaving his wife at court. There, Françoise was housed in rooms near the king's own apartments. Her chambers were filled with tapestries and books, perfumes imported from Florence, and delicate mirrors lined with gilded filigree. She was never crowned or formally titled, but everyone knew her role. She walked beside François at tournaments and masquerades, seated not beside the queen, but not far behind her either. The queen, Claude of France, was said to be gentle and pious, resigned to the king's infidelities. There was tension, yes, but never open war between queen and mistress. Françoise was not power-hungry. She did not meddle too deeply in politics, and that may have been her greatest strength. But time, as ever, marched on. A younger woman, Anne de Pisseleu, soon caught the king's eye. Françoise, sensing the shift in favor, did not cling. She withdrew, gracefully, as if fading into shadow. She returned to Brittany, to her husband's estate, where stories say she lived quietly, surrounded by books, letters, and the memories of a court long past. Some say she died tragically, perhaps even at the hands of her jealous husband. Others suggest she passed peacefully, her name spoken only in whispers at court. Whatever the truth, Françoise remains an early symbol of the royal mistress, not a schemer, but a poised, dignified woman who walked briefly in the golden light of favor and vanished before it could consume her. Now, drift again, not far in time, to the arrival of a very different kind of woman. Where Françoise was composed and subtle, Anne de Pisseleu de Hailly was brilliant, bold, and undeniably aware of her own power. She was born into minor nobility, but Anne rose swiftly thanks to her wit, her beauty, and her education. She spoke multiple languages, debated theology, and matched scholars word for word. When she met François I, he was aging, weary from war, but still very much alive with desire for brilliance and charm. Anne was everything he sought. She was not afraid to challenge him, to tease, to provoke, to discuss philosophy by candlelight. And so, Anne became the king's favorite. Unlike Françoise, Anne did not remain in the background. She took her place at court boldly. Her dresses set fashion trends. Her hair, always elaborately styled, was mimicked by ladies across France. Her signature perfume was said to linger in the halls long after she passed. Anne was gifted the title Duchess of Étampes, and with it came land, influence, and wealth. She surrounded herself with poets and artists, and she wielded political influence from behind silk curtains and over evening banquets. There are letters, surviving still, where diplomats appeal to Anne before approaching the king. She was no mere lover, she was a political force, but with influence comes enemies. The king's own son, the Dauphin Henri, later Henry II, despised her. His mistress, Diane de Poitiers, saw Anne as a threat. The court split into factions, and as Francois's health declined, so too did Anne's position. When the king died in 1547, Anne's enemies struck swiftly. She was stripped of her title, her properties, and her jewels. She was forced to retreat from court, her dazzling life reduced to whispers. But even in exile, Anne retained her mind, her pride, and her reputation as one of the most intelligent women ever to grace the French throne, not as queen, but as mistress. Let us drift now across the sea, where the air is thick with incense and firelight, and Tudor roses bloom in silent, anxious gardens. There, at the glittering court of King Henry VIII, we meet Anne Boleyn. But before the rise, before the crown, there was the mistress. Anne had lived in the courts of the Netherlands and France. She returned to England not as a wide-eyed girl, but as a worldly, cultured woman. She knew music. She danced with elegance. She had a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind. When Henry noticed her, he was still married to Catherine of Aragon. Anne's sister, Mary Boleyn, had already been the king's lover, but Anne would not follow in her footsteps. She refused Henry's advances, and in that refusal he fell. He began to court her with letters, loving, pleading, sometimes even poetic. Anne responded with caution. She knew that becoming his mistress would mean eventual discard, but becoming his wife could change everything. The affair that followed would shape the fate of England. Henry broke from the Roman Catholic Church to marry Anne, forming the Church of England in the process. Anne was crowned queen. She walked beneath golden canopies, her dark hair flowing loose over her shoulders. She gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, who would one day become one of England's greatest monarchs. But Henry grew restless, disappointed, and angry. Anne, once mysterious and magnetic, was now vulnerable. Enemies surrounded her, some jealous, others fearful of her influence. And soon, the accusations came. Infidelity, treason, incest. The trial was swift, and in May of 1536, Anne Boleyn, once mistress, once queen, was led to the scaffold. She wore a grey damask gown, her face calm, her eyes wide. With a single stroke of a French sword, she was gone. But her story echoed through history. Anne was perhaps the most famous mistress to ever live. She played the role carefully, deliberately, and reached the heights of royalty. But her tale is also a warning of the dangers of ambition and the cost of walking too close to power. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine her in the gardens of Hever, her childhood home, barefoot in the grass, her eyes fixed on the sky, a woman who dreamed and burned bright before the shadows claimed her. Let us into the opulent world of Versailles, where royal mistresses didn't merely exist, they reigned in their own dazzling right, with perfume-thick air, towering hairpieces, gilded salons, and secret passageways. The French court became a theatre for passion, power, and politics, all played out behind layers of lace and powdered masks. Settle in deeper now. Let your thoughts grow heavy as candlelight flickers in velvet-draped halls, and let's slip into the golden age of royal mistresses. Before we meet the women, let's wander just for a while through the palace that held them, Versailles. a name that rolls like silk across the tongue. Once a modest hunting lodge, it was transformed by Louis XIV, the Sun King, into a masterpiece of extravagance. It was a place where even silence had to sparkle, where floors were waxed to a mirror shine, and courtiers rehearsed their smiles as much as their bows. Behind its grand halls and formal gardens lay a second Versailles, a shadow realm of secret stairwells, private salons, and secluded apartments. This is where the mistresses lived, not in the staterooms, but in private wings near the king's bedchamber, accessible only through carefully guarded doors and whispered codes of conduct. Their rooms were no less ornate: gilded ceilings, silk canopies, custom perfume fountains, even hidden entrances for the king to visit discreetly or passionately. The royal mistress wasn't just a lover. She was a reflection of the king's mood, a political signal, a mirror of the monarch's private self. And no one embodied that more than our next muse. Madame de Montespan. Born Françoise Athénaïse de Rochechouart de Mortemart, she arrived at court with a laugh like falling glass and a tongue sharp enough to slice through diamonds. She was married to a marquise, but her heart and her ambition were far grander. She began her ascent not as a seductress, but as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Maria Theresa of Spain. Ironically, this position placed her at the heart of court life and in the very rooms where the king spent his time. Athénaïs was no mere beauty. She was witty, deliciously sarcastic. She could debate philosophy, write poetry, and host gatherings where the nobility whispered in awe and envy. Louis XIV noticed her not just for her porcelain skin or her deep blue eyes, but because she could speak to him as an equal. When their affair began in the late 1660s, it was hardly a secret. At the time, the king's mistress was Louise de la Vallière, a gentle and pious girl who was no match for Montespan's fire. Louise was quietly pushed aside, her tears ignored by courtiers who now fluttered around Athénaïs like moths to flame. For over a decade, Madame de Montespan held the king's affection and immense power. She bore 7 children by him, many of whom were later legitimized and given titles. One son became the Duke of Maine, another married into the bloodlines of future European monarchs. Her apartments at Versailles were sumptuously decorated. She held influence over ministerial appointments and received tributes from foreign dignitaries. People began to whisper that she was the true queen. But of course, such brilliance cannot shine without casting shadows. Rumors began to circulate, dark ones, that Montespan had dabbled in black magic, that she consulted fortune-tellers and made blood sacrifices to retain the king's love. And then came the affair of the poisons. In the 1670s, a wave of arrests swept the court. Fortune-tellers, poisoners, and witches were dragged into the light. Some implicated Montespan, claiming she had commissioned love potions, curses, even black masses. Though never officially charged, the scandal tainted her. Louis began to withdraw. Eventually, she was replaced, but not exiled. Montespan retired to a convent, a strange ending for a woman once considered the most powerful in France. She spent her last years in quiet reflection, giving large donations to charities, praying, perhaps, for forgiveness, or simply for rest. Imagine her now, in her former salon, empty of courtiers, where only dust motes swirl like faded ghosts, and the echoes of laughter cling to the corners like forgotten perfume. Now, we turn our gaze to Madame de Maintenon. If Montespan was the fire, Maintenon was the smouldering coals beneath. Born Françoise d'Aubigné, she came from poverty. Her father was imprisoned. Her early life was hard, marked by uncertainty. And yet, through patience and intelligence, she climbed the ladder of French society. She began as a governess, to Montespan's children no less. It was during this role that the king noticed her. She was calm, sincere, devout, so very different from the dazzling Athénaïs. As Montespan's star dimmed, Maintenon's rose. She became a confidant, then an advisor, and finally, it is believed, his secret wife. Though she never received a public title, her influence in court was profound. She steered Louis toward religious piety, encouraged modesty in dress and behavior, and helped orchestrate the education of noble girls at Saint-Cyr. She was not a mistress in the carnal sense, but a partner of the spirit. And though her reign was quiet, it lasted longer than any before her. A woman who came from nothing and ended as the Sun King's twilight companion. As we float gently into the reign of Louis XV, we meet perhaps the most iconic of all French mistresses, Madame de Pompadour. Born Jeanne Antoinette Poisson, yes, her name meant fish. She was destined for obscurity. But her mother believed in prophecy. A fortune-teller had once declared that Jeanne would one day capture the heart of a king. And so she was trained accordingly. Dancing, poetry, music, conversation. Her entire life became preparation for a role no one could apply for. When she met Louis XV in 1745, she enchanted him immediately. He built her a private château at Versailles, the Petit Trianon, her official title, Marquise de Pompadour. Though their romantic relationship faded within a few years, their friendship endured. She remained his closest confidant for 2 decades. She advised him on political appointments, patronized artists, musicians, and architects, and even shaped foreign policy. Voltaire adored her. Boucher painted her. The Rococo era bloomed in her image. Soft colors, floral pastels, playfulness, and grace. Despite suffering from ill health and court intrigue, she kept her head high, her powder flawless, and her correspondence eloquent. When she died in 1764, Louis reportedly wept and whispered, "I will never forget her." Let your eyes rest now, and imagine her there in a rose-coloured salon with pages of poetry scattered across her lap and candlelight catching in the facets of her fan. A woman of ideas, of beauty, and of extraordinary resilience. Now settle in. Let the sounds of the palace melt into silence, and let us wander now into the age of powdered wigs, embroidered waistcoats, perfumed letters, and secret rendezvous behind velvet curtains. Imagine the year is 1660. The Puritans have been defeated. The theatres reopen. Ale flows freely. And a king returns from exile, bringing with him not just a royal name, but a taste for pleasure, spectacle, and unapologetic indulgence. Charles II, the merry monarch, becomes king, and with him England enters its most sensuous age. Tall, dark-eyed and charming, Charles II turned his court into a glittering stage. Masks, poetry readings, dancing, gambling, everything the Cromwell era had forbidden, Charles encouraged. But perhaps nothing defined his reign so thoroughly as his mistresses. They were bold, they were visible, they were powerful. Let's step into the lives of the women who captured the king's gaze, and often the kingdom's pulse. Meet Barbara Villiers, later titled the Duchess of Cleveland. With chestnut hair tumbling over ivory shoulders and eyes that burned like brandy, Barbara was no quiet courtier. She was wild, she was fierce, and she wielded her allure like a weapon. She met Charles II before he reclaimed his throne during his exile in Holland. At the time, she was married to a dull and unremarkable man named Roger Palmer, but her ambitions were anything but dull. When Charles became king, she became his most prominent mistress, despite being married. She was given rooms in Whitehall Palace, where she lived in opulent comfort. Courtiers bowed to her. Foreign dignitaries brought her gifts. Ministers consulted her as if she were a queen in all but name. She bore 5 children by Charles, 3 of whom were officially acknowledged. Barbara was known for her fiery temper and unfiltered speech. She could rage one moment and weep the next, then smile, curtsy, and have a lord dismissed from his post with a whisper. She demanded wealth and received it, townhouses, jewelry, titles, and yet her position was always precarious. When her influence waned, she fought to keep it, but eventually her rivals, including actresses and dancers, replaced her in the king's affections. Still, she had played her role in history, and what a bold, blazing role it was. Picture her now, reclining on a velvet chaise, letters from Parliament strewn at her feet, a glass of claret in one hand, and a smirk that could melt the wax from a candle. If Barbara Villiers was fire, then Nell Gwyn was sunlight. Born in poverty, some say in a brothel, Eleanor Nell Gwyn rose through the streets of London like a feather on the wind. By her early teens, she was an orange seller at the King's Theatre in Drury Lane, where she caught the eye of a leading actor, and eventually took to the stage herself. Audiences loved her. She was funny, bold, and her wit was sharper than a courtier's sword. When Charles saw her perform, he was captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her humour. Their romance began shortly after, and unlike many others, Nell never tried to hide her origins. She laughed when people called her a whore. She said, "True, but I am the king's whore." She lived at Burford House, provided by Charles, and bore him 2 sons, one of whom was granted the title Duke of St. Albans. She never received a formal title herself, though many begged the king to elevate her. Yet Nell didn't mind. She remained immensely popular with the people. They saw her as one of their own, a common girl who had made the king laugh and never grew haughty with success. When Charles lay dying in 1685, his last words reportedly included, "Let not poor Nellie starve." Imagine her now, on a quiet summer evening, her son asleep in the next room, the stage curtains of the day drawn closed, and her laughter echoing softly in the shadows. In contrast to Nell's warm simplicity was the graceful, calculating elegance of Louise de Querouaille. A French noblewoman sent to the English court, Louise was believed to be more than just a companion. She was a political agent, encouraged by Louis XIV to charm Charles II, and perhaps influence him. And oh, she succeeded. Louise became Duchess of Portsmouth, lived in palatial luxury, and maintained a correspondence with the French court. She bore Charles 1 son, who was raised with every comfort. Louise was often resented in England, both for her foreignness and her perceived manipulation, but she remained quietly powerful. She was refined, impeccably dressed, and a lover of the arts. When Charles died, she returned to France, living in calm retirement until her death. Where Nell was earthy and direct, Louise was porcelain and poised, a mistress of diplomacy and of royal affection. And now, Let us drift toward the turn of the 18th century, into the days of carriages, empire waist gowns, and powdered hair curling into the early Regency era. Enter Dorothy Jordan. Born Dorothea Bland, she was an Irish actress known for her comic timing and glowing stage presence. She met Prince William, Duke of Clarence, the future King William IV, in the late 1780s. They never married, but lived together as openly as propriety would allow. For over 20 years, they shared a domestic life more stable and devoted than most royal unions. They lived at Bushy House, where Dorothy raised their 10 children, yes, 10, alongside William's formal staff. She continued acting while mothering the children, playing roles of mischievous maids and witty widows. Her laugh became her signature. But as William's political star rose, pressure mounted for him to make a suitable royal match. He dismissed Dorothy, offering her a pension, but she was heartbroken. She died alone, in poverty, in France, a tragic end to a bright and enduring life. Yet her children, known as the Fitzclarences, were later integrated into the noble circles of Britain. Dorothy's legacy, like Nell Gwyn's, was in her heart, her humour, and her humanity. Imagine her now, resting behind the curtain of a quiet theatre, the echoes of applause still warming her skin as candlelight dances against velvet drapery. Now we step beyond opulence and charm, and into danger, politics, and even revolution. So now, take a deep breath. Let the world around you melt into soft velvet and golden candlelight, and let us explore. We begin this tale in the waning twilight of the French monarchy as the drums of revolution began to rumble faintly on the horizon. The year is 1769. Versailles is still gleaming. The salons are still echoing with laughter. And into this golden world walks a woman with no noble title, no courtly pedigree, and no political alliances, only beauty, charm, and ambition. Her name was Jeanne Bécu. You may know her better as Madame du Barry, the last official royal mistress of France before the Revolution. Born the illegitimate daughter of a seamstress, Jeanne was raised far from courtly circles. She worked as a milliner's assistant, a shop girl, and eventually as a courtesan favoured by the wealthy. Her beauty was legendary: soft, pale skin, golden hair, eyes that shimmered like a spring sky. She was introduced to Louis XV through his courtiers, who hoped a new, light-hearted companion might lift the aging king's spirits. But there was a problem. She wasn't noble. To officially be presented at court as Mistress en titre, she needed a title. And so, in a plot worthy of a play, she was quickly married off to the Comte du Barry, a title in name only. Now nobility, she was welcomed into Versailles, though not without scandal. The court despised her. Many whispered that she was nothing more than a plaything. Even the young Marie Antoinette, not yet queen, refused to speak to her. But Louis adored her. He showered her with jewels, with portraits, with a palace of her own. Chateau de Louveciennes, where candlelit dinners and poetry readings unfolded under frescoed ceilings. Du Barry was more than a mistress. She became a symbol of excess. But she, too, had a heart. She supported artists, helped the poor. And when Louis XV died, she wept genuinely. After his death, she was banished from court by Marie Antoinette, who now reigned as queen. Du Barry lived quietly until the Revolution, when her past caught up with her. In 1793, she was arrested for her ties to the monarchy. At her trial, she sobbed, pleaded, and fainted in the courtroom. But mercy was not fashionable in revolutionary France. On December 8th, 1793, she was led to the guillotine. Witnesses say her golden hair blew softly in the winter wind. She cried, "You're going to hurt me. Please, just a moment more." And then silence, the final whisper of Versailles. Now, we travel further across time into the mid-19th century, to a woman whose name would become synonymous with scandal, strength, and chaos, Lola Montez. Born Eliza Gilbert in Ireland, she reinvented herself as a fiery Spanish dancer, complete with castanets, mantillas, and a fabricated past. She captivated audiences across Europe with performances that were less about technique and more about attitude. She once slapped a critic across the face with a riding crop for mocking her show. But it was in Bavaria that her legend truly ignited. She caught the eye of King Ludwig I, an aging, eccentric monarch who had grown weary of the stiff traditions of German court life. Lola was electric. They met in 1846. Within days, she became his mistress. Within weeks, she was a baroness. And within months, she was hated. The Bavarian elite loathed her influence. She dressed in men's clothing. She rode horses. She hosted salons filled with artists, musicians, radicals. She pushed Ludwig toward liberal reforms, infuriating conservatives. When protests broke out, they cried, "Away with the whore." Eventually, Lola was forced to flee. Ludwig abdicated shortly after. She had brought down a king, all without wearing a crown. Lola wandered the world after that, Paris, Australia, New York, lecturing, performing, even rescuing animals. She died in 1861 at just 39, but her story, her fire, still burns bright. Picture her now, in a lamplit hotel room in Manhattan, her velvet dress draped over a chair, the sound of distant hooves on cobblestone as she pens a memory of Munich, where a kingdom fell at her feet. And now, we glide toward the snowy courts of Imperial Russia, to a place of crystal chandeliers, furs lined with ermine, and silence that echoed across icy palaces. Our story turns to Catherine Dolgorukov, the woman who loved Tsar Alexander II with a devotion so deep, it outlived dynasties. Catherine met Alexander when she was only a child, he the emperor of all Russia. She was sent to be educated alongside his daughters at the Catherine Institute, an elite boarding school near the Winter Palace. As she grew, so did his affection. By the time she was 17, he had fallen completely in love. But he was already married to Empress Maria Alexandrovna. Still, he began seeing Catherine in secret, and in 1870 she became his mistress. He gave her titles, estates, and eventually children. 3 were born before the Empress died. When Maria passed away in 1880, Alexander and Catherine married in a private ceremony, making her his morganatic wife. She was never recognized as Empress, but she lived at the heart of the palace. Their relationship was genuine, deep, loving. Alexander intended to crown her formally, but history had other plans. On March 13th, 1881, he was assassinated by revolutionaries in St. Petersburg. Catherine was with him when he died. She buried him, mourned him, and retired into silent widowhood. For decades after, she lived quietly in France, caring for their children and writing long letters filled with love, regret, and memory. Her story was not about scandal, but about tragic love, one that defied custom and perhaps would have changed the Russian monarchy forever. had it not ended in blood. Let's continue our lantern-lit journey into the world of royal mistresses. In this next dreamy chapter, we'll explore more intimate, engaging portraits of royal lovers from across Europe and beyond. Women who lived within velvet-draped chambers, moved with hushed footsteps through royal corridors, and bore the secret weight of desire and danger. So now, gently close your eyes if you wish, and let the soft breath of history wash over you like silk rustling through the folds of time. Let's return once again to the French court, this time to the era of King Henry IV, the first of the Bourbon kings. Before Louis XIV's golden age, before Versailles glowed like a jewel, there was Henri, clever, dashing, and endlessly entangled in romantic intrigue. His heart had many keepers, but one of the most dramatic was Henriette d'Entragues. Born into a noble family, but with a fiery temper and piercing wit, Henriette was not content to be just another mistress. No, she wanted to be queen. When Henry IV first met her, she was already known for her sharp tongue and clever games. But he was enchanted. He showered her with jewels, gave her a pension, and promised her, yes, promised her in writing, that he would marry her if his wife died. And then, his wife did die. But Henri did not marry Henriette. Instead, he chose Marie de Medici. Henriette flew into a fury. She schemed, plotted, and became involved in dangerous intrigues, including a conspiracy to assassinate the king. Though she was eventually arrested, her noble connections spared her execution. She lived out her days in disgraced luxury, bitter and proud. Imagine her now, seated at her writing desk, the ink trembling in her hand, a letter crumpled on the floor beside her. The soft rustle of satin echoing in her empty rooms, once filled with laughter and promise. Now, let us go further back in time, to the 15th century, to the court of Charles VII of France, a king haunted by the 100 Years' War and a court burdened by gloom. And into that darkness came a star, Agnes Sorel. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was daring, fashionable, and utterly unlike anyone the French court had seen before. She became the first recognized maîtresse en titre, the very first official royal mistress in France. Agnes wore low-cut gowns that exposed her bosom in a time when modesty was expected. She wore diamonds, pearls, and perfumes imported from Venice. Her daring fashion even led to a French sumptuary law being passed restricting such styles. But the king loved her dearly. She brought joy back into his life after long years of war. He gave her lands, titles, and even allowed her to sit beside him at court as if she were his queen. She bore him several children, and her influence was not merely personal. She advised him on court matters, and it was whispered that even the famed Joan of Arc's rehabilitation was something she had supported behind the scenes. But her life ended suddenly. At the age of just 28, she died mysteriously, poisoned, some believed. Even centuries later, when her body was exhumed in the 2000s, traces of mercury were found, perhaps used as a medicinal treatment, or perhaps something more sinister. Still, her legacy lived on. She was a queen in all but name, and the path she walked, brave, brilliant, and scandalous, would be followed by many others. Ah, now let us drift softly to Tudor England, that land of sharp collars, heavy silks, and candles flickering against stained glass windows. Before Anne Boleyn, there was Mary. Mary Boleyn was the elder sister, less politically ambitious, but no less alluring. She was sent to the French court as a young girl, where she was exposed to the sensual manners of Renaissance royalty. Upon returning to England, she joined the court of Catherine of Aragon, Queen to Henry VIII. And there, she caught the eye of the king. Their affair was not long, but it was intense. Some believe she bore him children, perhaps even Henry Carey, later a nobleman and favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. But unlike her sister Anne, Mary never sought to rise. She did not demand marriage. She did not dream of crowns. Eventually, Henry turned his attention to Anne, and the rest is history. Mary married a commoner for love, lived a quieter life, and died in peaceful obscurity. Yet her story lingers, a ghost beside the fire of Anne's more dramatic fate. Imagine her now, walking in a sun-drenched orchard, her hair braided simply, the world of court behind her, and her heart quiet at last. Let us now step away from Europe and into the elegant, jade-lit gardens of Ming Dynasty China. Here, in the swirling mists of Suzhou, lived Liu Rushi, one of the most famous Yiji, a courtesan not only skilled in the arts of love, but also poetry, calligraphy, and philosophy. Liu Rushi was unlike any woman of her time. She often dressed in men's robes. She debated Confucian scholars. She wrote poems that touched the heart like falling plum blossoms. She met Qian Qianyi, a high-ranking scholar official, and became his lover, then his wife, in a time when marriage to a courtesan was scandalous. But their bond was unbreakable. Even as dynasties fell around them, even as they lost their lands, Liu remained by his side. When he was imprisoned, she pawned her jewelry to bribe the guards. When he wept, she wrote poems of resilience. And when he died, she followed him in grief not long after. Their love was passionate, tragic, and deeply literary. Though she was never a mistress to a king, her story embodies the same currents: love against custom, brilliance in the shadows, and the ache of forbidden affection. Now picture her, ink-brush in hand, by the soft ripple of lotus ponds, the fragrance of sandalwood rising through bamboo slats as moonlight kisses the paper she fills with verse. Let's now fully embrace the deeper, dreamier storytelling you're looking for. Stories that unfold slowly, with rich textures, intimate details, and a voice that gently lulls the listener into a state of calm, curiosity, and restful wonder. We'll revisit some of the most intriguing royal mistresses in history, but this time we'll take our time, walking beside them in candlelit chambers, pausing to gaze out palace windows, feeling the softness of velvet and the tension beneath powdered courtly smiles. So now, settle in deeply, let your breathing slow, and imagine the soft rustle of tapestries, the creak of ancient wooden floors, and the soft murmur of a story waiting to be told. Let us wander now into the gilded palace of Versailles in its earliest days, before it became the sprawling jewel we know today. The year is 1661. The air is heavy with rosewater and newly plastered walls, the scent of varnish mixing with lavender from the Queen's apartments. The palace is still under construction. Scaffolding clings to the side of the grand halls like ivy. Yet, within its bones, the beginnings of a myth are taking root. At the center of this myth is Louis XIV, the Sun King, and quietly orbiting him like a pale moon in his brilliant sky is a girl named Louise de la Vallière. Louise was not like the others at court. She did not glitter with diamonds. She did not seek attention or power. Her beauty was soft, understated. Not the kind that walked into a room with thunder, but the kind that stayed, like the warmth after a sunset. She was a lady-in-waiting to Louis's sister-in-law, quiet, devout, and unambitious. But the king noticed her. Perhaps it was her gentleness that drew him, or the way she looked down when he spoke to her, blush rising in her cheeks. Perhaps, after so many cunning women, he craved sincerity. Their love affair began in secret. Letters passed, glances exchanged in mirrored halls, midnight walks in garden paths swept with moonlight. But secrets in Versailles are short-lived. When the affair became public, Louise was devastated. She had not asked for this. She had never wanted to be a mistress. And yet, she was now the king's lover. Louis gave her a title, Duchess of La Vallière. He built her a suite in the palace. He filled her lap with pearls and gold. But Louise never grew comfortable in this role. She was tormented by guilt, by shame. She believed her love was real, but that her soul was now stained. She bore the king several children, including a son who would be legitimized and raised at court. Yet even as her children were clothed in silk and trained for greatness, Louise wore sorrow like a shawl. When the king's affections began to drift toward another woman, Madame de Montespan, her rival, Louise felt it coming like winter. Rather than fight, she withdrew. First, emotionally, then physically. Eventually, she asked the king to release her. She left court. She entered a Carmelite convent. There, she lived for 36 years in silence and prayer, barefoot and veiled, rising before dawn to chant in cold stone halls. When she died in 1710, the court barely remembered her. But in her final years, Louise had found the peace that Versailles had denied her. Now close your eyes and imagine her, kneeling before a flickering altar, the distant sound of bells in the wind, her hands no longer heavy with rings, but warm with quiet hope. Now we step into the cobbled, noisy, candlelit London of the Restoration, a city of plague carts and playhouses, powdered wigs and Puritan protests, and among the taverns and theatres of Drury Lane there danced a girl with laughter in her step and mischief in her eyes. Her name was Nell Gwynn. She began her life in the lowest of circumstances, born in a brothel, raised in the scent of gin and damp straw. Her mother worked in alehouses. Her sister took to the streets. And yet, little Nell had something different: charm, wit, and most of all, timing. She began selling oranges to theatre-goers, but it wasn't long before she caught the eye of the players on stage, and then the playwrights, and finally, the king himself. Charles II. Merry Charles, they called him. After years of war and exile, he brought laughter and elegance back to England, and Nell, more than any other, made him laugh. She wasn't a duchess. She didn't speak French, but she had spark. Charles took her as his mistress and kept her close. He gave her a house on Pall Mall, a wardrobe of silk and lace, and later 2 sons, one of whom he made Duke of St. Albans. But Nell was different from the others. She didn't play politics. She didn't whisper poison in the king's ear. When courtiers mocked her humble beginnings, she quipped, "I was born in a brothel, yes, but I am now the king's harlot. And you, madam, are merely a harlot without a king." She famously once told a crowd booing her gilded carriage, "Be quiet, good people. I am the Protestant whore." And Charles adored her for it. Even as he took other mistresses, Nell never lost her place in his heart. When he lay dying, barely able to speak, his final words were said to be, Let not poor Nellie starve. And she never did. She died young, at just 37. But she left behind a legend of laughter in the darkness, of a woman who rose from the shadows to walk among kings and never stopped smiling. Now imagine her, beneath the stage lights of Drury Lane, her copper curls pinned up, her fan hiding a wicked smile, the scent of oranges still clinging to her sleeves. Let us now descend once more into the golden shadows of candlelit corridors where secrets passed from velvet lips and destinies were rewritten in whispered promises. You're lying still now, your breath easy, the flicker of history like a lullaby in the dark, and the next tale awaiting just behind the rustle of silk. Ah, Versailles. Again we find ourselves here. But now the palace is a mirror of the king's majesty. Gold leaf glistens along ceilings, chandeliers shimmer with cut crystal, and every hallway is a portrait gallery of conquest, courtly splendor, and careful deception. And in the very center of this perfumed dream stood Madame de Montespan. She was not merely the king's mistress. She was his equal in spirit, his co-ruler in bed, and, whisper it softly, perhaps more beloved than his queen. Her name was Françoise Athénaïs, and she was born to the illustrious house of Mortemar, one of France's oldest and most noble families. She was not the shy, delicate type. No, Athénaïs was ablaze in a world of candles. Her beauty was undeniable. Golden curls that fell like spun light, blue eyes with flecks of silver, a smile that could bend wills. But it was her mind, her wit, her unmatched presence that made her irresistible. At first, she was merely a lady-in-waiting to Queen Marie-Thérèse, but she was ambitious and clever, and she had no desire to sit in the second row. She wanted the Sun King himself, and so she became his mistress, at first discreetly. Quiet meetings in rose-scented salons, stolen moments after court balls, but soon she eclipsed all others. Madame de Montespan wasn't just a mistress, she was a phenomenon. She had her own apartments, more lavish than some queens in Europe. She dined with the king, advised him on policy, influenced the arts. For over a decade, she reigned beside him, not as his wife, but as his chosen consort in all but name. She bore him 7 children, many of whom were legitimized and rose to power in their own right. The Maison de Montespan was practically a dynasty. But behind the diamonds, behind the laughter, something darker brewed. Versailles was always a palace of beauty, but beauty can cast deep shadows. In the 1670s, a scandal shook the French court to its core. Women, noble women, were being arrested and accused of witchcraft, poisoning, and performing dark rituals. They whispered of La Voisin, a midwife and fortune-teller who claimed to sell poisons, love spells, and even black masses, secret ceremonies held with blood, incense, and heretical rites. And among those drawn into the web was Madame de Montespan. Servants testified that she had visited La Voisin, that she had commissioned potions to keep the king's love, that she had allowed black masses to be performed in her name. One such mass was said to include a sacrifice, a baby, though no proof ever surfaced. The king, terrified of public disgrace, buried the scandal. Montespan was never charged, never exiled, but from that moment, the light around her began to dim. She remained at court, but no longer in the king's bed. She was replaced, slowly, quietly, by a new, humbler mistress, Madame de Maintenon, a woman of piety and control. Montespan faded into the background. She retired from court life. She withdrew to a convent, and there she remained, cloaked in silence and incense, offering prayers in place of power. She died in 1707 at the age of 66, and Versailles moved on. But the legend of the woman who had once ruled the heart of France endures like perfume on parchment, like embers under ashes. Now drift with me, past the hall of mirrors, past tapestries of conquest and peacock feather fans, to the stillness of her final chapel. Hear the echo of her heels, and the hush of a woman who once wielded power like a blade of velvet. Let us now cross the Channel to England again. The year is 1660, and the monarchy has just been restored. Gone are the Puritans and their drab greys. Now the royal court flows with ruby silk, polished boots, and the sparkle of scandal. And none sparkled brighter or bolder than Barbara Palmer, the infamous Lady Castlemaine. She was the first official mistress of King Charles II and the very embodiment of Restoration England. Bawdy, brazen, and breathtakingly beautiful. Barbara's hair was a cascade of rich chestnut curls, her eyes the shade of polished mahogany, and her mouth, that mouth, was often smiling, though not always kindly. She was married, of course, to Roger Palmer, a dull and unimpressive man. But Barbara had no time for dullness. When Charles returned to England from exile, Barbara saw her chance, and she took it. She was in his bed before he was fully settled on his throne. She was demanding, temperamental, and shockingly outspoken. But Charles was bewitched. She bore him 5 children, and each one was granted noble titles. Barbara was made Duchess of Cleveland, given multiple estates, a fortune in gold, and power over court appointments. She was not quiet about her position. She stormed the palace halls. She slapped maids. She once punched a rival mistress in the face. She was scandal incarnate, and yet utterly magnetic. But time has no patience for tempests. As Barbara aged, her hold on Charles weakened. He turned to other women, first Nell Gwyn, then others. Barbara retired with her wealth and lived into old age, still titled, still feared, still unforgettable. Picture her now, reclining on a chaise longue, a goblet of Burgundy in hand, her dog curled at her feet, and her sharp, clever eyes watching the world crumble beneath her with amused detachment. Let us now continue drifting gently through the velvet corridors of royal intrigue, where candles burn low, and the air is filled with the soft rustle of lace and the faint scent of jasmine carried on the breeze of time. You may close your eyes if you wish, or simply let your gaze soften as we begin our next chapter, one where longing and duty entwine like ivy over stone, and where a woman's love shaped the ambitions of an emperor. Picture now, dear listener, a snow-covered Polish estate in the early years of the 19th century. The trees are bare, their fingers stretched to the sky in silence. The wind whispers stories of occupied cities and fallen flags, while inside, behind frosted windows, a woman with chestnut curls stares into the fire, waiting for history to find her. Her name was Marie Walewska. Born into minor nobility, Marie was quiet, reflective, a woman more suited to poetry and piano than to palace intrigue. Her marriage was not for love. It was arranged, as so many were in her day. Her husband, Count Athanasius Walewski, was decades older, a man of importance, yes, but not of her heart. And yet, the winds of destiny were already gathering. In the year 1806, the world stood at the feet of a man not born into royalty, but who wore a crown forged in fire. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French. His armies swept across Europe like a tempest, and now his gaze had turned eastward, to Poland, a nation then divided and held in fragments by foreign powers. To the Polish people, Napoleon was not just a general, he was a symbol, a hope, a man who might restore their homeland, bring unity where there had been none, and drive away the empires that had carved up their lands like a feast. And so, when Napoleon arrived in Warsaw, he was welcomed with open arms and carefully selected guests. Among them, the young Countess Marie Walewska. She had not wanted to attend. She was modest, reserved, and had little desire for the loud pageantry of courts. But Poland's nobles saw an opportunity. They believed that if Marie could enchant Napoleon, if she could capture his heart, he might feel more bound to their cause. She could become the voice of their sorrow, the whisper in his ear when maps were drawn. It was not just a seduction for herself, but for her country. And so she went. Marie's first meeting with Napoleon was quiet, but electric. He was intrigued by her innocence, her sweetness. In a court of flattery and performance, she was refreshingly genuine. She did not flatter him. She did not throw herself at his feet. She looked away when he stared too long, and that, more than anything, made him want her. He began sending her letters, dozens of them, sweet, persuasive, and insistent. At first, she refused. She had no desire to be a mistress. She was a wife, a mother. She valued honor, but the pressure from her family, from the court, and the burden of Poland's hope pressed upon her like a crown of thorns. She relented, and so began one of the most tender and tragic affairs of Napoleon's life. Their affair unfolded quietly. Marie was given rooms near his apartments. Their meetings were cloaked in secrecy, their walks taken in the hush of midnight gardens. Marie was not like Josephine, his wife, who was flamboyant and worldly, nor like the calculating duchesses of Europe's great courts. She was still like water, calm, deep, and sad, and Napoleon loved her for it. He gave her gifts, yes, but more than that. He spoke to her. He called her his little Polish wife, and when she became pregnant, he was overjoyed. Their child, Alexandra Walewski, would later be acknowledged by Napoleon and go on to hold high political office in France. But for Marie, happiness was always fleeting. She knew she could never be his empress. He had ambitions greater than her country, greater than love. He would need to marry for power, for dynastic alliances. And so, as quietly as she had come into his life, she stepped out. Let us now allow the gentle waves of history to carry us deeper into the world of royal mistresses, where glamour meets tragedy and where the dance of power is as delicate as a sigh. Imagine, if you will, a dimly lit theatre in early 19th century Ireland. The air is thick with the scent of candle wax and the faint murmur of expectant patrons. On the stage, a young woman with fiery red hair, sharp eyes, and a voice that could both charm and command, performs with the passion of a tempest. This was Eliza Rosanna Gilbert, but the world would come to know her by a far more captivating name, Lola Montez. Her life was a whirlwind, a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, rebellion, and a fierce hunger for freedom. Born in 1821 in Ireland to an impoverished family, Eliza's early years were marked by hardship. But she was gifted, fluent in several languages, skilled in dance and theatre, and possessed of a magnetic personality that could capture any room. As she grew, she reinvented herself again and again, from a schoolteacher to a dancer, from a scandalous actress to a noblewoman by claim. And then, her path crossed with royalty. By the time she reached her late 20s, Lola was performing in the grand salons of Europe, captivating aristocrats and commoners alike with her exotic Spanish dance and daring persona. It was in Munich, in the Kingdom of Bavaria, that her star truly rose. King Ludwig I of Bavaria was a man of contradiction, an enlightened ruler with a passion for art, philosophy, and beauty, yet bound by the rigid constraints of 19th century monarchy. When he saw Lola, he was entranced. To him, she was a breath of wild air, a storm in a kingdom bound by tradition. And so the king made her his official mistress, bestowing upon her the title of Countess of Landsfeld and showering her with jewels, palaces, and influence. But Lola was no ordinary mistress. She was fiercely independent, outspoken, and unafraid to challenge the king, the court, or the rigid societal norms of her time. She introduced radical ideas, supported liberal causes, and even influenced political decisions. Her presence at court was electric. She hosted salons where artists and thinkers debated, where music and laughter filled the air. Yet behind the glittering facade was a woman who craved respect and authenticity. She wrote letters filled with poetry and longing, revealing the vulnerability beneath the fiery exterior. Their relationship was as tumultuous as it was passionate. Lola was known to be jealous and volatile, sometimes clashing publicly with other members of the court. She wielded power with a mixture of charm and cunning, making allies and enemies in equal measure. Her influence led to reforms, but also unrest. The conservative factions of Bavaria were scandalized by her presence, and political tensions grew. Eventually, the backlash became too strong. In 1848, amidst revolutionary fervor sweeping Europe, Lola was forced to flee Bavaria for her safety. She left behind a kingdom shaken, a king heartbroken, and a legacy that would echo for decades. Lola's later years were marked by travel and reinvention. She became a lecturer in the United States, speaking on politics and social issues with the same fiery passion that had defined her life. Though she never regained the royal favor she once held, her story remained one of fierce independence and the relentless pursuit of self. She died relatively young in 1861, but her legend lived on as the woman who dared to defy convention, who turned a royal court upside down, and who danced on the edge of history itself. Let us continue this slow, soothing journey through history's most fascinating royal mistresses, allowing each story to unfurl like a soft ribbon of silk in the quiet night. We begin with the enchanting Madame de Pompadour, whose elegance and intellect shaped the very heart of French court life. Close your eyes gently and imagine Paris in the early 18th century, a city humming softly with the delicate clatter of carriages and the distant chatter of café patrons. It is 1721, and in a comfortable bourgeois home, a young girl named Jeanne Antoinette Poisson is growing up. Unlike many of the women who would later hold royal favor, Jeanne was not born into nobility. Her family was wealthy but middle class, their life marked by education and refinement rather than titles and land. She was clever, well-read, and possessed a charm that could melt the coldest of hearts. As she blossomed into a young woman, her beauty was both subtle and radiant, a porcelain skin flushed with the faintest rose, eyes bright with curiosity and wit, and hair the soft shade of autumn chestnuts. In 1745, her life took a turn that no one could have foretold. Through connections and a keen mind, Jeanne was introduced to King Louis XV, a man longing for both companionship and inspiration amidst the heavy burden of monarchy. Their meeting was less a collision and more a dance, graceful, measured, and intimate. Louis XV was instantly captivated, not merely by her beauty, but by her intelligence and refined tastes. She was unlike any other woman at court. She did not simply smile and obey, she spoke, suggested, and inspired. She was made Marquise de Pompadour, a title that would soon be whispered through the gilded halls of Versailles. Unlike the fleeting romances of many royal mistresses, Madame de Pompadour's influence was deep and enduring. She was a patron of the arts, commissioning paintings, supporting playwrights like Voltaire, and helping shape the Rococo style that graced the palaces of France. Her salons became hubs of intellectual conversation, where philosophers and artists mingled with nobles and politicians. She advised the king on political matters, gently swaying decisions behind the scenes, always careful to maintain a balance between power and grace. Though their physical relationship lasted only a few years, Madame de Pompadour remained the king's closest companion and confidant for 2 decades. She was by his side through illnesses, wars, and court intrigues. Her letters reveal a woman of warmth, humor, and resilience. Imagine her sitting by a crackling fire, writing by candlelight, her quill gliding over parchment as she reflects on love, duty, and the ephemeral nature of power. Madame de Pompadour died in 1764 at the age of 42. Her death was mourned deeply by the king and court. She left behind a legacy far beyond that of a mistress, a legacy of culture, refinement, and enlightened influence. Her story lingers like a soft perfume in the halls of Versailles, a testament to the quiet strength of a woman who wielded power with grace. Now, as your breath deepens and your body relaxes more fully into rest, picture Jeanne Antoinette, poised, radiant, and timeless, as the candle flickers low and the night stretches endlessly before you. Let us now glide softly into the next tale, a story of friendship, loyalty, and whispered secrets amidst the gilded cage of the French court. A story of Duchess Yolande de Polignac, a woman whose life was forever entwined with the fate of a queen. Imagine the soft rustle of silk gowns and the faint clinking of delicate porcelain in a Parisian chateau in the mid-18th century. Yolande Martine Gabrielle de Polignac was born in 1749 into one of France's most noble families, a family whose lineage stretched back centuries, steeped in tradition and responsibility. From a young age, Yolande was raised to embody the ideals of aristocratic womanhood, grace, discretion, and unwavering loyalty. She was educated in literature, music, and etiquette, preparing her for the life she would inevitably lead, a life of service within the glittering yet unforgiving world of the royal court. When Yolande was chosen to be a lady-in-waiting to the young Marie Antoinette, newly arrived as Dauphine of France, their friendship blossomed quickly and deeply. Marie Antoinette, herself a young woman far from her native Austria, found comfort and solace in Yolande's steady presence. Yolande was not just a servant of the court, she was a trusted companion, someone with whom the queen could share her hopes, fears, and dreams. Their bond was a private sanctuary within the chaos of Versailles. Though Yolande was not a mistress in the traditional sense, her closeness to the queen granted her significant influence. She became a gatekeeper to the queen, a confidant to the king's most intimate circle, and at times a lightning rod for the court's jealousies. Her position was delicate, balanced between devotion and political intrigue. She was loved by Marie Antoinette, but mistrusted by others, and as the pressures on the monarchy increased, so did the scrutiny upon her. The years rolled forward like a slow tide, carrying with them the growing unrest that would soon engulf France. Yolande's loyalty to the Queen never wavered, even as whispers turned to shouts and the court's walls trembled under the weight of revolution. She faced exile and disgrace alongside Marie Antoinette, her life forever changed by the turbulent times. Yet through it all, her story is one of steadfastness, a quiet light amid gathering darkness. Yolande lived her final years away from the court in the peaceful countryside, her heart forever marked by the memories of friendship and loss. She passed away in 1793, the same year Marie Antoinette met her tragic fate. In the hush of the evening, as your breathing slows and your thoughts drift gently away, picture Yolande seated by a window, gazing at the stars that shimmer above the vast forests of France. A woman who loved fiercely, endured deeply, and whose story remains a whisper on the winds of history. And now, dear listener, as the night enfolds you in its velvet embrace, feel yourself sink deeper into calmness, carried by the gentle tide of these stories, each one a soft echo from a time long past, yet alive in the quiet spaces between your breaths. Let us gently continue weaving these soothing tales, each one a soft step deeper into the quiet elegance of royal courts past, where secrets whispered behind silk curtains and love blossomed amid power and peril. Imagine, if you will, the soft flicker of candlelight illuminating the humble streets of Paris in the early 18th century. The clatter of wooden carts blends with distant laughter and the occasional murmur of a quiet marketplace. Here was born Jeanne Bécu, later to be known as Madame du Barry, the last and most famous mistress of King Louis XV. Her beginnings were far from regal, a simple, beautiful girl raised in poverty, whose life could have easily slipped away unnoticed in the crowded lanes of Paris. Yet fate, like a gentle current, began to carry her toward a destiny few could imagine. Jeanne's beauty and charm were undeniable. Her radiant smile, sparkling eyes, and wit caught the attention of powerful men who introduced her to the glittering world of high society. Through patience and cunning, she captured the notice of Louis XV, a monarch weary from years of rule but still enamored by beauty and youth. Despite court opposition and scandal, Jeanne's influence grew. She was more than a mistress. She became a symbol of desire, survival, and the complicated dance of power and vulnerability. At Versailles, Jeanne's days were filled with opulent balls, whispered intrigues, and delicate negotiations. She navigated a court that both admired and despised her, maintaining grace amid envy and suspicion. Her influence extended beyond the bedroom. She advised on fashion, art, and even politics, using her position to shape the king's favor and the court's culture. Yet, beneath the glitter lay a woman who longed for genuine affection and respect. As the years passed, the tides of change swept through France. The scandals surrounding the monarchy grew louder, and Madame du Barry found herself increasingly isolated. When Louis XV died in 1774, her fortunes reversed sharply. She was exiled from court, a fallen star fading into obscurity. Her final days were marked by hardship, but her story remains a testament to resilience and the complex humanity behind royal glamour. Now, dear listener, feel your eyelids grow heavy as you imagine the silken gowns and whispering shadows of Versailles, the soft footsteps echoing down long marble halls, and the fragile heartbeat of a woman who lived between light and darkness. Imagine the bustling streets of 17th century London, alive with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the chatter of market sellers, and the soft glow of lanterns casting long shadows as night falls. Amidst this lively city was born Eleanor Gwynn, known affectionately as Nell Gwynn, whose journey from a humble orange seller on the streets to the cherished mistress of King Charles II reads like a tale whispered on a gentle breeze. Nell's charm was not only in her striking auburn hair and bright, sparkling eyes, but in her quick wit and warm laughter that could lighten the heaviest heart. She rose from the crowded playhouses where she performed comedic roles, enchanting audiences with her vivacity and natural grace, to capture the affection of a king famed for his many loves. Unlike many mistresses bound by courtly rules and intrigue, Nell's relationship with Charles was marked by warmth, humor, and genuine affection, a rare light in a royal world often shadowed by politics and power struggles. Their love brought Nell the privileges of palace life, yet she never lost the spark of her spirited independence, often mingling with the common folk and endearing herself to the people with her kindness and humor. Imagine her walking quietly through the palace gardens in the soft moonlight, the fragrance of blooming roses filling the air as she reflects on a life transformed by chance and charm. Though their time together was punctuated by the unrest of the era and the king's many other liaisons, Nell Gwynn remains remembered not just as a royal mistress, but as a symbol of joy and resilience. As your breath slows and your body sinks deeper into calmness, picture Nell's infectious smile lingering gently in the stillness, a soothing echo from a time when laughter and love briefly softened the weight of crowns. Let us drift gently onward through the soft corridors of time, where history's whispers settle like morning mist upon ancient stone. Picture now the opulent courts of England in the late 17th century, where the air is thick with the scent of burning candles and delicate perfumes, and the flicker of candlelight casts dancing shadows on tapestry-lined walls. In this world lived Barbara Palmer, later known as the Duchess of Cleveland, a woman whose fiery spirit and undeniable beauty made her one of King Charles II's most powerful and influential mistresses. Born into a noble family, but marked by scandal and ambition, Barbara's path to the king's favor was as much about her keen intelligence as her captivating presence. She was known for her boldness, wit, and a magnetic personality that could turn the heads of courtiers and kings alike. Life at court was a mixture of lavish balls, whispered conspiracies, and precarious power plays. Barbara wielded her influence not merely through charm, but with a sharp mind and an understanding of politics and patronage that made her a force to be reckoned with. She bore several of the king's children, securing her position, but also weaving a complex web of loyalties and rivalries that shaped the very fabric of the Stuart court. Imagine her seated in a richly adorned chamber, the silk of her gown rustling softly as she plots her next move with quiet determination, the golden light of dusk filtering through stained glass windows. Yet behind the grandeur lay moments of solitude and reflection, where the weight of her choices and the fickle nature of royal favour settled gently upon her like a soft, heavy cloak. As your body relaxes deeper, your mind slipping into that tranquil space between wakefulness and dreams, let Barbara Palmer's story remind you of the fragile balance between power and vulnerability, of hearts both guarded and yearning, tucked away behind palace walls. Let us continue to glide softly through the quiet corridors of history, where every whispered secret and delicate sigh of the past invites you deeper into restful calm. Picture yourself now in the lush gardens and ornate halls of the 18th century French court, where a new figure steps into the delicate dance of royal favour, Marie-Thérèse Louise de Savoie, better known as the Princess de Lamballe. Though not a mistress in the traditional sense, her story is woven closely with the intimate circles of Queen Marie Antoinette, her life marked by loyalty, tragedy, and the shimmering tension of a world on the brink of upheaval. Born into noble Italian and French bloodlines, the princess was educated in the arts of grace, diplomacy, and discretion, qualities that would serve her well in the volatile atmosphere of Versailles. She became the trusted confidant and superintendent of the Queen's household, a role that granted her proximity to royal secrets and endless court intrigue. Imagine her stepping lightly through gilded corridors, her footsteps muffled by velvet rugs, her thoughts a delicate balance between duty and the desire for genuine friendship. Her bond with Marie Antoinette was deep and tender, a rare solace amid the suspicion and scandal that swirled like a dark cloud above the palace. Yet, as the revolution gathered its shadowy strength, the princess's loyalty placed her in grave danger. Her story ends not with the soft closing of a book, but with the harsh clang of history's cruel hand, captured and brutally executed during the Reign of Terror, a tragic echo of a world lost to chaos. As you breathe slowly and deeply, let the quiet strength of the Princess de Lamballe's spirit settle like a gentle lullaby, reminding you that even in darkness there is a light that lingers softly in the heart. Let us wander onward, dear listener, into the soft, velvety folds of another story, where candlelight dances gently across marble columns and silk curtains sway with the breath of a summer breeze. Envision now the grandeur of the Holy Roman Empire in the early 18th century, where the vast and glittering court of Vienna hummed with music, ceremony, and the measured footsteps of courtiers in powdered wigs. Here, in this world of strict hierarchy and elaborate protocol, lived a woman whose influence radiated not through noise, but through poise, gentleness, and remarkable grace. Maria Wilhelmina von Neipperg, the secret mistress of Emperor Joseph II. Wilhelmina, a countess by birth, was known for her intelligence, her deep understanding of the arts, and a quiet beauty that lingered in a room long after she had gone. She first met Joseph in a setting both intimate and refined, perhaps at a musical gathering or a scholarly salon, where words carried more power than glances and shared philosophies stirred more deeply than any fleeting touch. Their connection grew not from scandal or spectacle, but from mutual respect and the kind of longing that is carefully veiled beneath polite conversation and the rustle of taffeta. Joseph, weighed down by the burdens of reform and rulership, found in Wilhelmina a balm for his restless spirit, a sanctuary where he could speak freely, think aloud, and for a brief time be simply a man rather than a monarch. Their affair remained quiet, almost ghost-like, concealed behind layers of formality and guarded silences. Imagine Wilhelmina sitting beside a window in her private chambers, the pale morning light illuminating the parchment in her hands as she reads a letter in Joseph's hand, his words tender and carefully chosen, signed without titles, without fanfare, only his name, simple and true. Their love, though profound, was bound by the walls of duty and the weight of expectations, and like a candle burning low in a draughty hall, it flickered gently, steadily, until it faded into memory. As you relax even deeper now, let your breath rise and fall like the gentle flutter of lace in a spring breeze, and let the memory of Wilhelmina's quiet devotion wrap around you like a silken shawl. Now, let us turn our gaze toward the sunlit shores of Sweden, where pine forests stretch to meet frozen lakes and royal palaces stand like quiet sentinels over centuries of intrigue and longing. In the mid-18th century, among the candlelit courts of Gustavian Sweden, we find a woman whose beauty and brilliance captivated a king torn between duty and desire. Sophie Hagman, a ballerina of humble birth who became the mistress of Prince Frederick Adolf, the youngest brother of King Gustav III. Sophie was not born into privilege or station, but into the world of art and movement. Trained from a young age in the graceful discipline of ballet, her body flowed like water to the music of violins, and her presence on stage stirred more than applause. It sparked the heart of a prince. Their meeting was like something from a soft dream, perhaps backstage after a performance, when the air still shimmered with the energy of the dance, and Sophie, cheeks flushed from exertion, met the gaze of the young prince. From that moment, their paths wound together through a tender, clandestine love affair, one that defied the rigid boundaries of royal expectation. Unlike the cold formality of court marriages, Sophie and Frederick's bond was filled with warmth and mutual respect. She lived not in the grand palaces, but in a secluded home arranged for her by the prince, where every detail was crafted with care. Here she cultivated a quiet life, filled with books, embroidery, and gentle evenings spent walking through gardens wrapped in soft wool cloaks against the northern chill. And yet their love bore the weight of the crown. Frederick wished to marry Sophie, but the court forbade it, citing her low birth and the unyielding expectations of royal lineage. Their affair, though long and deeply affectionate, was always suspended in a delicate tension, neither fully acknowledged nor entirely hidden. As time passed, Frederick remained devoted, but political pressures mounted. Eventually, their separation became inevitable. Yet even after their parting, the prince ensured Sophie was treated with dignity, granting her a pension and protecting her name from scandal. In the quiet of her later years, Sophie lived a peaceful life away from the court, her days marked by stillness and memory. Imagine her now, seated near a window overlooking the garden, her hands resting lightly in her lap, the evening sun casting a golden halo around her silver hair. In her gaze is not regret, but a kind of peaceful melancholy, an understanding that love, even when not crowned, still leaves its mark on the soul. And now, as your breathing slows, imagine the hush of Swedish snow falling gently outside her window, blanketing the world in silence, just as sleep begins to blanket your thoughts. Sophie Hagman's story lingers, a tender snowfall of remembrance softly falling through time. Very well, dear listener, let us drift deeper still, into the rich tapestry of time, where the flicker of candlelight still dances on the velvet walls of distant courts, and the echoes of forgotten laughter and whispered promises linger like a soft perfume on midnight air. Allow your breath to fall into rhythm, gentle and unhurried, as we now travel to the vast, snow-covered majesty of Imperial Russia, where power, passion, and peril often mingled like ink in water. In the cold, gilded corridors of the Russian court, where heavy furs brushed against marble columns and golden double-headed eagles watched silently from the walls, a young woman by the name of Marta Helena Skowronska would rise from complete obscurity to become something no mistress in history had yet dared to dream, an empress. Later known as Catherine I of Russia, her journey from servant to sovereign began not in opulence, but in hardship. She was born into poverty, possibly of Lithuanian or Latvian origin, and by the chaos of fate found herself in the household of a Lutheran pastor, where she worked as a domestic servant. Quiet, dutiful, and unassuming, her life might have faded into history like a snowflake into the Neva River, if not for the sweeping tides of war and empire. It was during the Great Northern War that her path crossed with that of Peter the Great, the towering Tsar whose energy and ambition reshaped Russia. Catherine became his mistress, then his companion, and eventually, through quiet devotion and a remarkable steadiness, his wife. Their bond was one of deep affection and mutual trust. Though uneducated, Catherine possessed a natural intelligence and calm, a warmth that soothed Peter's fierce temper and gave him comfort in his most troubled hours. Imagine her now, seated beside the great Tsar after a long day of reform and campaign, her voice low and steady, her presence like the glow of a hearth in the heart of winter. In a world where noble birth meant everything, Catherine's ascent was unprecedented. After Peter's death in 1725, with court factions circling like wolves, Catherine did not retreat into mourning or exile. She rose to rule in her own name, becoming the first woman to occupy the Russian throne. Though her reign was short, it was gentle and wise, marked by compassion and pragmatism. Her story, while not that of a traditional mistress, is a testament to the quiet power of love and loyalty, and the remarkable truth that a woman from nothing could hold an empire in her hands. Let your thoughts drift now like snowflakes over the palatial rooftops of St. Petersburg, the golden domes glinting in the pale sun, the hush of history settling softly upon your shoulders. And as we slip further into the stillness of the night, dear listener, let us now drift together into a more expansive and soothing exploration, not of one single woman, but of the very life of royal mistresses, those luminous, enigmatic figures who moved like shadows and starlight through the gilded halls of palaces, whose lives unfolded quietly behind the embroidered veils of royal courts. Let your breath slow with each word, and let the gentle rhythm of the past guide you deeper into tranquility. To be a royal mistress was to exist between two worlds, not quite queen, and yet far more than any ordinary lady. The royal mistress often held a place both perilous and privileged. Her presence in court was at once delicate and powerful, like the shimmer of silk in torchlight, subtle yet impossible to ignore. These women came from many paths, some born into nobility, others raised in the countryside or brought from the theatre stage, but all had something, an intangible quality that caught the eye of a king and stirred his heart. It was rarely beauty alone. No, it was something deeper, a sparkle in the eye, a way of speaking that lingered like a melody, a clever remark that made even a monarch pause. Some were quiet and mysterious, others lively and daring. Some were scholars, poets, artists in soul. Others were tacticians in silk gloves, understanding the language of power even before they understood the man they would enchant. The beginning of such a journey might be an invitation to a royal ball, a fleeting encounter in a garden, or a moment caught across a grand hall. Perhaps she was a lady in waiting, arranging flowers in the Queen's chamber when the King first noticed the tilt of her head, or perhaps a court dancer, her body moving to the music while the King's eyes lingered just a little longer. Word would be sent, discreet, respectful, wrapped in roses and riddles, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls of her life would shift. Becoming a royal mistress meant entering a life of luxury and fragility. She might be given rooms in the palace, furnished with velvet drapes and gold-leaf mirrors. She might receive jewels, titles, and even lands. Some bore the king's children, whose fates rested in the delicate web of court politics. But with favor came whispers, jealous glances from other courtiers, cautious distance from the Queen, and the constant hum of uncertainty. For the king's affection could warm like the sun or vanish like mist. In private, her relationship with the king was often more tender, more human than the outside world would ever see. Imagine her sitting beside him as the fire crackled low, reading poetry into the quiet hours, or laughing softly as he let down the weight of his crown. Many kings turned to their mistresses not just for pleasure, but for comfort, counsel, and companionship, needs that courtly duty could never fully satisfy. Some mistresses became political advisers in all but name. They whispered in the king's ear before audiences, offered gentle insights after diplomatic dinners, and sometimes served as intermediaries between rival factions. Others kept to the shadows, avoiding scandal and seeking only the quiet glow of affection, content with letters, secret meetings, and walks beneath lantern-lit gardens. Their days were filled with fine dresses and silk shoes, but also with strategy, managing rivals, calming jealous nobles, and keeping the king's interest in a world that demanded novelty. And always, always the knowledge loomed, that favor could fade, that a new face could arrive at court, and the tides would shift without warning. Yet for all the uncertainty, many royal mistresses found ways to shape history in their own quiet manner. Some sponsored artists and writers, commissioning works that still survive. Others used their influence to free prisoners, to protect friends, or to guide policy. Their fingerprints rest subtly on the pages of the past, their voices long faded but never truly lost. Now, as you lie back in this still moment, imagine one such woman walking slowly through the candlelit corridors of her royal apartment, her gown whispering softly across marble floors, her heart full of dreams, fears, and longing. She gazes through a window into the velvet night where stars glimmer like promises. She knows she is both visible and invisible, powerful and precarious, adored and watched. And in the quiet hush of that world, we hear her story, gently unfolding like petals of an evening rose. Dear dreamer, let us continue gently, like a soft hand turning pages by candlelight, to the individual stories of these royal mistresses, each tale wrapped in velvet silence, each name a faint echo in the chambers of time. These are not merely women of scandal or romance. They were stars in their own right, glimmering quietly in the corners of courtly life. So close your eyes and let the world drift further away as we begin once more. In the hushed opulence of 17th century England, amid the flicker of wax tapers and the rustle of silks through Whitehall Palace, there walked a woman of laughter, beauty, and boldness, Nell Gwynn, the most unlikely of all King Charles II's many mistresses. She was not born to court, but to the stage. A humble orange seller turned actress, Nell's wit sparkled even brighter than her auburn curls. Imagine her voice, merry and quick, rippling like a brook through the drawing rooms of London, capturing not only applause but a king's gaze. She met Charles during one of his nightly visits to the theatre, where he sought laughter to soothe the burdens of his restored reign. Their affair blossomed not in shadows but in light, for Nell, ever proud of her humble roots, made no attempt to mask her past. She teased the king, made him laugh, and most importantly, she made him feel like a man, not just a monarch. While other mistresses schemed for power and titles, Nell asked for little more than a comfortable home and care for her children. Her love was simple and sincere. Charles granted her a townhouse, a generous pension, and eventually a title for their son, whom she fondly called Little Bastard. Yet even in her elevation, she remained Nell, earthy, honest, and loyal. When Charles lay dying, it is said his last words were for her. "Let not poor Nellie starve," he murmured, a final plea wrapped in affection. And so her name remains not in scandal, but in sweetness, a soft sigh in the annals of English history. Breathe in now, slowly, and out, and let us drift softly toward the lush and perfumed gardens of Versailles, where fountains dance and music floats like mist through the air. There we find Madame de Montespan, mistress to Louis XIV, the Sun King. She was the queen of wit and charm, her presence as dazzling as the gold leaf that adorned the palace walls. Born Françoise Athénaïs de Rochechouart, she was noble by blood and luminous by nature. Her laughter was like warm honey, her voice rich with intelligence and mystery. She became mistress to Louis during a time of great spectacle, when France was the envy of the world and Versailles glittered like a dream. To win his heart, she wielded not only beauty, but conversation, artful, clever, and always laced with intrigue. Imagine the candlelit salons where she reigned supreme, her every word savoured like rare wine. She bore the king 7 children, whom he acknowledged and adored. But with love came rivalry, and the court was a swirling sea of envy and whisper. Montespan's star shone bright for many years, but as the seasons passed, her brilliance was shadowed by suspicion. The infamous affair of the poisons darkened her reputation, though never fully proven. Eventually, the king's affection waned, and she retired from court life, trading silk for sackcloth, jewels for rosaries. Yet even in seclusion she remained etched in memory, a woman who had once charmed the most powerful man in Europe and changed the course of history with a smile. And now, rest deeper, as we leave Versailles behind and sail quietly across the Channel back to England, where another woman awaited her moment beneath a stormy crown. Barbara Palmer, the Duchess of Cleveland, was one of the earliest mistresses of Charles II. Fierce and seductive, she strode through court with confidence, her dark eyes smouldering with defiance. She was not the comforting warmth that Nell Gwynn offered. No, Barbara was fire, passionate, bold, dangerous. Her relationship with Charles was tempestuous and consuming, a constant dance of desire and rebellion. She demanded titles, wealth, and status, and she received them even as the king grew weary of her demands. She bore him 5 children, and for a time she was the most powerful woman at court, eclipsing even the queen. But with time, her temper, her extravagance, and her political scheming began to wear thin. Still, Barbara never faded into obscurity. Even after her days as royal mistress ended, she remained a formidable presence, her life marked by luxury, scandal, and steel. Breathe deeply, and let the world of whispered courtly passion melt into soft mist around you. These women, each so different, were bound by the same fragile thread, the heart of a king. Their lives danced between love and politics, between power and peril, and in the stillness of their private chambers, behind silk curtains and guarded doors, they too longed for peace, for laughter, for something real amidst the illusion of grandeur. We shall continue our gentle passage through the echoing halls of time, treading ever so softly along the marbled corridors where love and ambition once intertwined beneath vaulted ceilings and glimmering chandeliers. Let your breath settle again, long and slow, and allow yourself to drift as we now visit the frozen splendor of Imperial Russia, where beneath the fur-lined cloaks and crystal snow, a woman of fire once stirred the soul of a Tsar. In the court of Tsar Nicholas I, there existed a woman whose presence was as delicate as snowfall and yet as fierce as the Russian winter itself. Her name was Varvara Nelidova, and she became one of the most discreet and enduring mistresses in all of Russian imperial history. She was not famed for scandal, nor celebrated for beauty, but for loyalty, patience, and quiet influence. A lady-in-waiting to Empress Alexandra, she first caught the eye of the Tsar in the soft glow of courtly gatherings, her eyes thoughtful, her manner restrained. Unlike many who rose quickly, only to fall just as fast, Varvara's relationship with Nicholas developed slowly, like a fire banked under snow. As the Empress grew more distant and the burdens of ruling a vast, unrestful empire grew heavier, Nicholas turned increasingly to Varvara for solace. In her quiet company, he found peace. She did not demand, nor seek titles or lands. Instead, she offered understanding. Their relationship was largely kept out of the public eye, handled with dignity and secrecy, so that even those in court who suspected dared not speak aloud. It was said that Nicholas once wrote her long, sorrowful letters, full of yearning and sadness, for she soothed him in a way the cold affairs of state never could. When Nicholas died, Varvara withdrew from court life entirely, her name left only in faded letters and half-remembered sighs. Yet in her silence she was powerful, a mistress not of scandal but of comfort, a chapter in history written not in ink but in whisper. And now we turn toward the hot, sunlit courts of Spain, where velvet drapes muted the footfalls of kings and golden crosses adorned every chamber wall. In the late 18th century, during the reign of Charles IV, there was a woman whose beauty captivated not only the king, but the entire nation. Her name was Maria Luisa de Parma, the queen consort, but it is her dear friend and rumoured confidante, Manuela Teles Giron, better known as the Duchess of Abrantes, whose name lingers in the scented corridors of power. Though technically not a royal mistress in the traditional sense, it is widely whispered that Manuela held the king's affection in a quiet and mysterious manner. She was elegant, refined, and possessed an intellect that could dance through conversation like a warm breeze. In the court of Madrid, where strict etiquette suffocated most women, Manuela thrived in a quiet rebellion, dressed always just a little too brilliantly, laughing just a little too freely. It is said she served as a kind of private muse for Charles, someone who could make him forget, just for a moment, the heavy crown he bore. Their relationship, while discreet, was woven into the folds of music, poetry, and long conversations in the palace gardens beneath the citrus trees. While others plotted and schemed, Manuela offered companionship without demand, and so became unforgettable. Now let us glide, like a feather on a still lake, to the glittering yet perilous court of Austria. In the 18th century, Emperor Joseph II, the brother of Marie Antoinette, ruled with a fierce devotion to reform and duty. But he was also a man burdened by loneliness. His heart had been shattered early in life when his beloved first wife died young, and afterward he grew colder, more distant, until he met Katharina von Pergen, a quiet noblewoman who would briefly reign as his secret source of warmth. Katharina, daughter of a diplomat, had a voice that carried like the rustle of wind through autumn leaves. She was not his official mistress, not publicly acknowledged, yet their bond was known in careful, respectful circles. She brought laughter back into his life, gentle laughter, the kind that fills a silent room with color. Their meetings were conducted in secluded palace chambers, far from the ears of advisers and ministers. She would often read to him, sometimes in German, sometimes in French, her voice a lullaby against the harshness of empire. Their relationship did not last many years, for Joseph's reign was brief and his health fragile. But to Katharina and those who remembered, their bond was like a candle left burning in the window of history, small, steady, and sweet. And now, as we descend deeper into dream, let us pause in the fragrant night air of Florence, where the Renaissance still stirs in the shadows. There we find Tullia d'Aragona, poet, philosopher, and courtesan, who, though not the mistress of a single king, was the muse of many noblemen, cardinals, and scholars. Tullia's story is different. She lived not in the shadow of one man's crown, but under the gaze of 100 admiring eyes. She was born into complexity, the daughter of a courtesan herself, but she rose to dizzying heights through her unmatched wit and artistic soul. She hosted salons where the greatest minds of Italy gathered to debate love, ethics, and philosophy. Her lovers were many, but none owned her. She wrote poetry of such sensual elegance and haunting truth that even the most devout clergymen found themselves unable to resist her mind. To be loved by Tullia was to be immortalized in verse, and while kings offered her jewels, it was her words, soft and sharp as moonlight, that made her eternal. So rest now, and let the echo of their lives, each so different, so rich, cradle your thoughts like a lullaby whispered across centuries. The halls of history are never empty, not with voices like these, moving like quiet spirits beneath the silk-draped ceilings of power and passion. Dear listener, we shall remain within the splendid and shadowed realms of European courts, where velvet-clad whispers echo down marbled corridors, and the love of kings, fleeting yet fierce, left quiet imprints on the hearts of women who dared to love in the limelight. Let your eyes grow heavy again as we resume our slow, dreamlike drift, deeper into the candlelit chambers of European royalty, where every sigh told a story and every gaze could change a life. Now we wander north to the cool, orderly elegance of the Swedish court in the 18th century, where a woman named Sophie Hagman quietly defied the rigid expectations of noble society. Sophie was not born into privilege, but into simplicity. She was a ballerina, a profession adored from a distance, yet not embraced by polite aristocracy. It was through the gentle flicker of footlight and the elegant sweep of her arms that she caught the eye of Prince Frederick Adolf, youngest brother of King Gustav III. Their relationship, unlike many others born in secret shadows, became an open and surprisingly accepted bond. Frederick chose not to hide her, but instead lived with her openly, forgoing marriage for companionship. Imagine the contrast: an opulent palace filled with marble statues and royal tapestries, and there, at its heart, a soft-voiced ballerina, graceful in her simplicity, her steps echoing softly down cold, echoing corridors. Sophie never demanded elevation, nor did she seek to become more than she was. Yet Frederick gifted her a home, an allowance, and above all, respect. Their relationship lasted nearly 20 years, rare stability in a world prone to fleeting desires. Even after they parted, they remained close friends, their love evolving gently into deep mutual care. And now we drift slowly to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a land of noble intrigue and waning grandeur, where the final king, Stanisław August Poniatowski, found both passion and political complexity in the arms of Elżbieta Branicka, a noblewoman of sharp wit and immense ambition. Their relationship began when Stanisław was still just a young noble serving abroad. Elżbieta saw in him a future king, and he in her a counselor, a muse, and a lover. As Stanisław ascended to the throne with the influence of Empress Catherine the Great, Elżbieta remained a constant figure by his side. Her beauty was not conventional, but her mind was unmatched, strategic, eloquent, and well-read. She advised him on matters of governance, accompanied him to state functions, and even defended him publicly when the tides of politics turned against him. Their love was a strange fusion of affection and necessity, a bond tempered by the fragile fate of a crumbling state. Though they never married, and though Stanisław would have other companions, Elżbieta remained the most consistent and politically impactful woman in his life. Now breathe in once more, deeply, and follow the gentle lilt of time back westward, to the Netherlands, where under the shadow of Habsburg influence and mercantile wealth, courtly life in the 17th century sparkled with quiet tension. Here, among tulip gardens and refined salons, we meet Margaretha van Raphorst, a little-known mistress to William II of Orange. She was the daughter of a nobleman, educated in music and the art of conversation, whose grace and charm caught the attention of the young stadtholder during his visits to the countryside. Margaretha's story, like so many, is veiled in partial silence, a name appearing in letters, a silhouette in diaries. Her presence felt more than proclaimed. It is said that William would ride out in the cool mornings, pretending to inspect troops or estates, only to spend quiet hours in Margaretha's manor, talking, listening, dreaming. She bore him at least one child, though the records are faint and delicately phrased. Unlike many mistresses of her time, she did not seek advancement at court, nor did she court scandal. She lived quietly, loved deeply, and faded into the fabric of Dutch nobility, like a thread of gold woven into darker cloth. And still we float to the court of Saxony, where glittering uniforms and embroidered gowns disguised the relentless maneuvering of dynastic politics. In the court of Augustus the Strong, Elector of Saxony and King of Poland, mistresses were not just lovers. They were symbols of power and refinement. None more so than Countess Anna Constantia von Brockdorf, later known as the Countess of Kossel. Anna Constantia was no passive ornament. She was fiercely intelligent, politically astute, and utterly captivating. When she entered court, her sharp tongue and sharp eyes made her both admired and feared. Augustus was enchanted. He made her his official mistress and granted her immense influence. She lived in near-royal splendor, dressed in silks imported from Venice, surrounded by rare books and costly jewels. But influence bred enemies. Anna's involvement in court politics became her undoing. When Augustus's interest waned and her political opponents gained favor, she was accused of treasonable correspondence with the king's enemies. She was imprisoned in Stolpen Castle for nearly 49 years, and so her story, once bright with promise and laughter, ended in long silence. Yet her name was never forgotten, for she was a mistress not of beauty alone, but of spirit. Let your breath grow deeper now, your limbs soft, as we gently close this chapter of our midnight wandering. And know, dear listener, that more stories await. Whispers from Vienna, from Bavaria, from the glistening palaces of Savoy and the courtly galleries of Denmark. The royal courts of Europe, so rich with light and shadow, hold endless tales of women who once stood beside crowns, not always acknowledged, but never truly forgotten. And so, dear dreamer, as the candle burns low and the velvet shadows grow long, we bring this soft journey to a close. From the silken chambers of Versailles to the quiet cloisters of Portugal, from jeweled courts wrapped in lace and secrets to the still, starlit solitude of forgotten gardens, we have drifted gently through the hidden lives of women who once loved in the orbit of crowns. These were not just mistresses. They were mothers, artists, dancers, duchesses, wise confidants, tragic muses, and fiercely radiant souls who lived in the margins of history but never truly disappeared. Let their stories, like the hush of falling snow or the lull of distant harpsichords, stay with you, a gentle echo in your dreams tonight. Until we meet again, may your dreams be filled with candlelight and calm, and may you rest as gently as the moon upon a sleeping sea. Good night, dear listener, and thank you from the heart for wandering through history with me.